Hey everyone, this is my presentation of my final paper. I'm going to try and keep it short, but there is a lot to cover, so I'm going to dive right in. My paper was on average life expectancy in the United States and why it has been declining and is starting to get vastly lower than other high-income nations. It rose at a similar rate as other nations, and then in 1980 it started to split off, and then since 2014 it has actually been declining every single year since, while the other first world countries continue to rise at the same rate. And so there are a number of factors, but the biggest ones are smoking, obesity, homicide, suicide, economic inequality, and the opioid crisis. So one of the reasons is smoking, and so smoking use has declined, but also the U.S. started using cigarettes very regularly sooner than other first world countries, but the decline also started sooner. Essentially, what we are experiencing right now are a lot of smoking-related deaths from the peak of smoking, and now they are getting lung cancer and experiencing the effects of that. And so we will continue to see those drop, and they're contributing less and less every year to life expectancy drop. Another one is obesity. 70% of Americans are overweight, and 1/3 are considered obese, and it is a problem in a lot of first world countries, but not nearly as much as it is in the U.S., and that causes a lot of obesity-related deaths. The U.S. has an unusually high homicide rate, and no country, the country that is closest is Canada, and theirs is 75% lower than ours. So we have a very much higher homicide rate, and regardless of how you feel about the Second Amendment, the presence of guns is a absolute driving factor in that. 76.7% of homicides are carried out by weapons. Suicide bears a lot of similarities to homicide in the fact that it really drags down the average life expectancy because victims are often young. And it's actually, suicide is the third leading cause of death between people ages 12 and 19, second only to accidents, essentially accidental death, and homicide is actually the second. So if that doesn't demonstrate the point extremely clearly, I don't know what does. And over half of homicides are carried out by weapons too. Homicides are also very closely linked to the method people use to carry them out. So firearms, again, another driving factor of that. Economic inequality. So the U.S. has a higher average income than a lot of other nations, but the gap is a lot wider. So there's a lot more of a disparity between the haves and the have-nots, so to speak. And this has a lot of effects. Infant mortality rates are significantly higher than any other first world country, and that drags down life expectancy a lot because it's such a low outlier that it just absolutely drags it down. Maternal mortality as well has been steadily rising in the U.S., and as it goes down in almost every single country around the world, third world, first world, we are like pretty much unique in that regard. It's crazy because with our privatized healthcare system, having a low income is a huge health risk. The difference between the average life expectancy of the lowest 1% and the highest 1% of Americans is 14.6 years, which that could be a whole other paper in itself, the factors that go into it. But one of the biggest factors, and probably the single biggest factor, is the fact that it is dangerous to be poor in the United States. Really though, all of these, we are higher than a lot of other countries, but where we stand out higher than any other country by far is our rates of opioid use. The opioid crisis is absolutely a huge, huge problem in America. Um, so basically the rate is that it's 13.34 people per 100,000 die every year from opioid use, and there are a handful of countries that even get close. So our number is 13.34. Libya is 2.27. United Arab Emirates is 5.4. Estonia, Russia, and Canada are all 3 to 5. But our number again was 13.34. Every single other country in the world has a rate lower than 3. So our number is well over 4 times that of almost the entire world. And the story behind this is quite shocking as well. Essentially, one company is responsible, a lot of experts think, for the majority of the opioid crisis, and that company is Purdue Pharma, formerly Purdue Frederick. And they are the inventors of Oxycontin. And so what happened is they invented MS Cotton, which was the morphine version of Oxycontin, and their patent was going to expire, and they can make generic versions of it, and then that'll really cut into profits other companies. And so they created Oxycontin, and they aggressively marketed it everywhere. They sent out a team of salesmen to market it to doctors, and behind the scenes, the family that owned Purdue Frederick, it was still a family-owned business, are the Sacklers, and they also had an entire, basically, media empire of medical journals, and they held all of these, apparently unbiased and conferences, and they created a complete, absolute overhaul in the medical industry of the way pain is looked at, and they basically destigmatized opioids. So a lot more doctors were prescribing them. They also made fraudulent studies that said that Oxycontin the abuse liability was way lower, and that only 1% of people get addicted. And that is just absolutely not true. So at the start, when they came out with Oxycontin started being everywhere, and it was really easy to abuse. You could chop up the pills, you could cut them up, and this opioid crisis started rising then. Well, once their patent for Oxy was about to expire, what they did is they made a different version, which was actually kind of a medical marvel that was not able to be abused. You couldn't crush it, you couldn't get the stuff out from the inside. It was just unabusable. And they argued that their old pill, to prevent from other companies creating generic versions, was too dangerous to sell, and the FDA banned it, even though they had been endorsing it days earlier as being less likely to abuse. And this new pill, the people who were addicted couldn't get all that rush because they couldn't get the rush of the opioids all at once because it wasn't able to be abused. And the reformulating of Oxycontin coincides perfectly with the rise of the heroin epidemic. And essentially it created this massive market for heroin that the producers and Mexican gangs were eager to fill. They came in, and heroin created a whole other set of problems. It's much easier to overdose on heroin. It's spiking the AIDS epidemic from needle use. And since then, the opioid epidemic and has just continued to ravage American society. And that, I believe, is really the worst reason. And it was created by the U.S. The FDA endorsed their fraudulent studies, and that was a huge selling point. And that created our unique problem here we have of overdoses, specifically opioids. And so those are the main reasons why the U.S. life expectancy is going down. There's a lot to fix. I think what needs to be done first is parties need to be held responsible, including the FDA, which endorsed these fraudulent claims. And yeah, the parties need to be held responsible in order for things to change. And in terms of things like obesity, those are a lot harder to change, but good government policy can create systemic change, and we can get back on the path to a rising life expectancy.